The 80s Rewind Show podcast.
It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host,
Rob, the face for Radio Burgess.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, it's the Rewind Show podcast with me, Rob, the face Radio Burgess. Welcome along to the podcast, and I'm so glad you're here to join me today. Thank you for joining me. I love the 80s as much as you do, clearly, that's why you're here. So do me a favour, if you can, like and subscribe, and if you can share the love about the show to your friends and your family and your neighbour, your postman, and anybody you meet, that'd be absolutely wonderful. Thanks, I really appreciate it. In advance, I know you're going to do it for me. It's brilliant. I spoke to a fantastic guest today, a wonderful, wonderful man. Jack Hues from the band Wang Chung, who had hits with Don't Let Go, Dance All Days, and Everybody Have Fun Tonight, as well as many, many more. We spoke about his early days starting a band and playing guitar, and we spoke about Wang Chung supporting the Cars, and as well as that, his solo work. I've been really lucky with the 80s Rewind Show to meet such amazing people and lovely people, and Jack is one of those people that is just absolutely lovely. I had an amazing morning with him talking about music and things we loved, and we had a lot in common. We're both Beatles fans, evidently. But Jack could not be nicer and more accommodating, so thank you, Jack, for your time. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the podcast, and don't forget, like and subscribe, and well, let's just get to it. So, where did it all start for you? Where was the genesis of music that made you go, this is what I want to do? Was it an album? Was it a film? Was it an experience? What was the first thing you...
It was the Beatles, and it was hearing Please Please Me on the radio, and I was only like 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, but I heard that music, and I've told this story many times before, but I remember it. I was in the kitchen with my mum, and she was doing the washing up and stuff, and Please Please Me came on the radio, and it just caught my ear, you know, and she was listening to it, and it's got that chorus that goes, come on, come on, come on, come on, and she went, oh, come on then, and sort of like turned it off, you know, and I just sort of thought, this is interesting, because this is like, she doesn't like it, and I really like it, you know, so it sort of lodged, and then I think I probably saw them on the Royal Variety performance soon after that, and yeah, and I think certainly from there, that was what I wanted to do. And, you know, my dad was a musician. He played saxophone. So there was music in the house and stuff, but it was jazz, predominantly sort of big band jazz, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And so it was there. And I didn't really, well, it's not true to say I didn't like it. I did like some of the records that he played, some of the Dave Brubeck and Paul Desmond stuff. But I was too young to get it at all. Do you know what I mean? But obviously the Beatles, I was... still young, but I really did get it, and I wanted to learn guitar. My dad very kindly bought me a guitar, like a very basic acoustic, you know, and insisted that I had proper lessons. That was the sort of deal. If I was going to learn guitar, I had to have proper lessons. So I went to this, what seemed to be an old lady, but she was probably like, certainly younger than I am now. And she taught me to read music and play guitar in a fairly restricted sort of way, and otherwise I wasn't having to play classical guitar in that strange way that you have to sit with classical guitar, so I could put it on my, you know, right leg, Bob Dylan style, and strum away, and she helped me with figuring out chords and stuff, you know, so it was good.
So was the guitar at the time, being young, was that your sort of channel for getting out expression? Was it definitely?
It was. I started writing songs probably when I was 11, 12. I remember being in a band at school and writing, the band was called The Footprints, and I wrote a song called Through and Through. I sort of wrote, I'm trying to think, did I write the lyrics? I think I did actually write the music and lyrics. And I'll play it to you if you want. No, I'm just kidding. I can sort of remember the first section of it. It wasn't terrible.
So the Beatles are obviously a huge influence on you. What did you feel the movement of the zeitgeist as well after that performance? Was it your friends were talking about it as well, and that reinforced your...
Yeah, my best friend Bill, you know, he started having guitar lessons with me, and it was very central in the culture. You know, it's not like now where music is a sort of add-on, or what is it, oral cheesecake, as Steven Pinker calls it. You know, it was like fundamental, and it was, in a sense, politically as well. In this, you know, because, you know, when the Queen wanted to give them MBEs, and, you know, Harold Wilson wanted to be photographed with them, it's the first time in a way that working class kids became desirable to the establishment. You know, and I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah,
I can't imagine the Queen wanted to be photographed with Tom York even, do you know what I mean? So,
I suppose it gave working class kids a reachable goal as well at that point. There was
it did. It was that and football, you know, with the ways out in a sense, you know. Right. But it was also, I think it was a sort of window to a whole different way of looking at life, really, which was that sort of the what's his name? David Lynch would call it the art life.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a Beatles period? Is it early Beatles or late Beatles?
I suppose the later period I still love, I mean, but some of the early stuff is great too. I was working on Things We Said Today a little while ago. Sometimes I get slightly obsessed with songs, and I did this gig where they wanted me to sort of do a little acoustic gig and talk about the songs that had formed me, as it were, that had made me. And I chose Things We Said Today as the Beatles song because it's so well crafted.
Yeah.
So I wanted to learn how to play it so I could show how the back end of the middle eight dovetails into the front of the chorus and all these, they're not that technical, but things that make you sort of think, oh, right, yeah, it is. This is a whole very sophisticated way, or not even sophisticated, it's a very elegant way of songwriting.
Yeah. Did it make you deconstruct your own writing in a sense when you looked at it? Does it make you sort of think, I could have written differently if I'd known this when I was 11 or...
Maybe, yeah. I mean, they have that story, don't they, about going across town to find the bloke who could play B7. So I suppose there was a bit of that going on for me. But by the time I was playing in bands and stuff, this was around the Let It Be period, but also when I was into the Cream and starting to get into prog bands as well.
Right.
So the musical horizons were actually pretty high, so those guitar lessons that I'd had for 4 years or so, stood me in pretty good stead to try and figure out what was happening on Roundabout by Yes or whatever,
I mean, it's interesting that the Beatles didn't have any lessons really at all, and then they wrote these amazing songs without any lessons. But lessons or no lessons, everyone writes brilliant songs if they're brilliant songwriters, don't they?
Exactly.
It's really strange. It doesn't matter which way you path you take as long as the songs... It's true. If a song sounds great on acoustic guitar, it's a good song, isn't it? It's the adage I always hear, which I think is right.
No, I did a bit of teaching songwriting here in Canterbury.
Oh, you did?
At Christchurch University, yeah. I did it for a few years. And I used to preface the class saying to the students, I can't teach you how to write songs, but I can sort of give you a methodology, which is basically have a way of writing down lyric ideas and musical ideas. They instantly come to you, as opposed to thinking, I remember that, and write it down in the morning, sort of thing, And it's kind of being, switched on all the time, really, or to observe what's going on around you, But it was interesting how there were certain people there who just naturally could write songs. They just understood the language. They understood the kind of emotional relationship between the lyrics and the words and the melody and the harmony and stuff. It was just all there. And there were others who really struggled, with those relationships,
Yeah.
And then in a sense, the more they thought about it, the worse it got, on that respect. But I do think, when they sort of say everybody's got a song inside them, I do think everybody does actually, And the experience of trying to write a song, at the very least, gives you a lot of respect for people who can do it.
Yeah. Does that happen to yourself? Are you walking down the road and you think, a lyric, and you have to write it down? Do you put it in your phone? Do you put a piece of paper?
Sing it into my phone these days. My phone has a lot of recordings of me going...
So your phone's just a whole demo, basically.
It is.
It's a demo. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. And sometimes the songs come complete almost. Do you know what I mean? You just sort of sit down and play them right out, and other times you're tinkering away, So on my latest solo album, Electroacoustic Works, we got to work together. That first track, that riff, I sort of thought of probably 10 years ago, sort of thing. And it was a while ago, but I was just came up with this sort of the kind of feel for the lyrics, and I was thinking, that riff that might fit, and it kind of did.
So don't chuck any away. That's
never throw anything away. Yeah, and record everything, And I think any artist, when you walk into a visual artist's studio and there's crap everywhere, isn't there? All the magazines and all the stuff they collect and keep, for reference. So it's the same with musicians.
So one of the first bands I saw you work for was it Scab Harry? Was that one of your early bands?
It was, yeah.
And what sort of band was it? Was it
It was a 3-piece, I think. It was me on. I think I was playing guitar and singing. My mate Bill still with me on bass. Nigel Robinson was the drummer, and I think that was the core of the band, really. That sort of 3-piece. So what would have been contemporary? I guess it was a sort of hangover from the Cream, really, who I never quite got over as being a model for what a band should be, And we were like proggy, it was proggy stuff. In fact, the brother of Nigel, Ian, did make recordings of us, and he recently sent me a CD of all sorts of stuff.
Wow, what was it like? Was it better than you thought? Was it worse?
It's ambitious, so yeah, that's the best word, I think.
And then was it with Scab Harry you supported Vinegar Joe?
That I really don't recall, actually, but quite possibly. When was that?
That would have been early 70s.
Yeah. If I was supporting anybody, it would have been with that band, with Scab Harry. Yeah.
I mean, because they're one of the greatest bands that never really broke through.
Okay.
Like, Vinegar Joe.
Yeah, I do remember the name, but I can't remember the band particularly.
It was Elkie Brooks and Robert Palmer. And then after that, was it the Intellectuals? Was that your band following?
Well, I think, so after Scab Harry, that was a school band, basically.
Right.
So then I went to university. And by the time I was at university, I was interested in classical music, I suppose, because you couldn't study jazz and rock like you can now. So a music degree meant music, which was considered at the time, classical music, and everything else was, pop music especially was really considered trash. And even film music was a joke for people then. I find it very interesting how now film music is regarded as, well, that's classical music, which it really isn't.
Yeah.
It's orchestral music, but it ain't classical, that's for sure. And that's not a criticism. It's just like, you don't mix those two things up, I don't think, we could spend the rest of the morning talking about that, actually.
Because it's amazing how you can buy, film soundtracks separately, the orchestral versions. And they sell just as well now.
They do.
So it's got Danny Elfman's name on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And John Williams, everyone's going, classical music. And even computer games, on Radio 3, which I listened to a lot on Saturday afternoons for a while, they had a program that talked about computer gaming music as, a legitimate realm of self-expression, which it certainly is that, but I guess the big difference for me is, when you've got music that's underpinning a narrative, accompanying it in a sense, that's a very different position from like a symphony, which is a bit of abstract music, which may well have narrative in it, but it's a different kind of approach to where the music sits,
Yeah.
And those are important distinctions, I think.
Yeah. So at this point in your life, if it was classical or pop, which one would you go for? Like if I put them down and said, pick one.
In a sort of desert island kind of way. I suppose it would be classical, which isn't to say I don't listen to a lot of pop music, I do. I'm still, interested in, hearing new bands and stuff and come across stuff all the time, which is interesting. Most recently, the Floating Points album with Pharoah Sanders and the London Symphony Orchestra. I guess it's it's file under jazz. They file it under, But what I love about it is that it's kind of unclassifiable,
Yeah.
But it was out in 2020, I think. It's a masterpiece.
Is it?
Really amazing, yeah.
So if people are going into that sort of music, would that be your go-to album for the moment, would you say?
Right now, it would, yeah. Although I can't think of many people who would come back to me and go, oh, yeah, it's brilliant, because it's got saxophone, improvised saxophone all over it, which a lot of people, it seems to bother the modern sensibility that somebody's just kind of meandering their way through it. I love that personally, but people seem to want to just have something more structured.
Is there kind of snobbery involved? It sounds as like the kind of...
I don't know about snobbery. I think it's a taste thing, I think, jazz is a 4-letter word. And a lot of people are offended by it. Well, offended is too strong a word, but they just don't like it, like the sensibility of it,
Yeah.
And I get that. I didn't, for many, many years, I didn't really buy jazz albums and stuff, And I was thinking recently about, Peter Wolf, who produced Everybody Have Fun Tonight. He joined Frank Zappa's band,
right?
And Frank had musicians that you were either in Miles Davis's band or Frank Zappa's band if you were one of those kind of high-powered, trained in Berkeley type musicians in the States,
Yeah.
And I remember Peter talking to me about Miles, and I was like, don't really know his work, which I didn't in the 80s, And Peter said, oh, God, that's crap. Took me out in his car and we drove around, wherever we were, like West Hollywood or something, and listening to Nefertiti. And I sort of thought, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. And I bought the album and I liked it. But it wasn't until the 90s when I was working with Jack Hues, who played me Kinda Blue, which is in a sense the classic Miles album, entry-level Miles album, that it suddenly dawned on me what was going on. And I don't know whether you have this, but sometimes something that was really pretty opaque to you suddenly illuminates and it becomes fascinating. And so I spent, a lot of time then getting myself acquainted with that sort of jazz, the classic jazz stuff,
For me, it was Led Zeppelin. When I heard Led Zeppelin the first time, I just thought, I can't get my head around this.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Billy Connolly says, you either get it or you don't. I think that's a great way of looking at things, especially when you get older as well.
Yeah.
And I put the first album, I thought, this is just racket to a degree.
Yeah.
And then 15
I do remember feeling that myself, actually.
And then 15 years later, I was like, this is just fantastic and just mind-blowing. It's just crazy how it turns around that way. I don't know, do you think it's like, as you get older, your tastes change, or you just think you become more aware of different music that it makes it more acceptable? Do you think it's...
It's an interesting question. I mean, there is this ridiculous thing that you read, saying your music taste is formed by the time you're 20 or something. It's crap, I think. So I think it's, I don't know. I think some people use music a bit like I think people, who am I to talk about people? But I observe over the years, people using art music like a mirror. So it has to reflect them back to themselves in some way or other, And I think as you get older, maybe that lessens and you start to hear music as it is, and then you go to it and sort of absorb it into yourself, So it depends whether it's a sort of narcissistic process where you just want it to be like you, or whether it's a sort of exploratory process where you want to kind of expand your thinking, and as your thinking expands, these bands or musicians or whatever it might be come into your orbit, and then you get into it.
And maybe you get more analytical as you get older as well about, like you said about the songwriting, you get a bit more sort of... Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe people start to understand music on a level they don't understand why they understand it. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Well, maybe even the whole notion of understanding music is inflating what you're doing, really, because it's like, I remember there's that old thing, isn't there? There's just good and bad music. There's no sort of genre definitions, jazz, classical, rock, whatever. But Miles sort of slightly, it's attributed to him anyway, slightly refined it by saying, there's just music that interests me and music that doesn't, And I think that, and again, some people I think are just happy for music to be in the background while they're getting ready for a club or something like that. And then it's got to be a certain sort of mood and it's got to fit with them where they are. Yeah. Other people want to sit and listen to the music and find out about it and see where it's going, And there are a lot of people like that, I think, And that's the difference, maybe.
I had a sort of similar thing where the power of music frightened me at one point. Mm-hmm. And I was DJing in a club for many years, and I was playing a dance classic, and I think I had 700-800 in the room, something like that. It was quite busy, and I remember playing this song, and I said, right, in the chorus, now sing, and they all sung exactly at the same time, and this whole wall of sound just hit me, like, and I was like, oh, this is scary. Yes, it's either you embrace this power or you get frightened by it. And I was terrified for a minute, because I just thought, anything can happen, but nothing happened. Everyone was having a great time and they had their hands in the air and stuff. But you understand the power of, if you get the right sort of emotion going with music, you can do anything with it. And when you see or you read historical riots at rock concerts and stuff like that, I totally understood it in that 1 second. I get how you could just say, smash the place up and people will do it because everyone's just in the same place at the same time and the same mindset.
It's a very interesting phenomena.
It is,
yeah. That sort of mass hysteria, isn't it, really?
It's crazy.
Yeah. But it's a very positive thing as well, I think, that
100%.
Experience of being in a crowd at a gig where you're all in the same moment with the same emotion, in a sense. You know, and it's being transmitted at you by another human being rather than a film or whatever.
That's why I think the live experience over the 2 years of COVID has been really, I've missed that so much because, seeing lots of bands and just being in the room with strangers that put their arms around you and hello, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
This person is your best friend for the next 2 hours.
Yeah. That doesn't happen so much at the Barbican, but
so after that, was it 57 Men you was in with Glenn Gregory from Heaven 17? What sort of band was that? Was that sort of a prog band again? Was that an industrial band?
It was more kind of funky, I guess, So I met Nick when I left university, having decided that being a classical composer was probably a little impractical. And so Nick, had this band, The Intellectuals, which I joined effectively through the legendary audition, up in North London. And and the pattern in those days was, so you form the band, you rehearse. I think we did some demos, which you send to the record companies. And then you were on this sort of circuit of pubs on the outskirts of London. I guess Camden Town was the most central area that you would play. And sometimes we did gigs at the Marquee, or there was a place in Victoria called The Venue, I think, which was a popular place at the time. That probably was a little later that we did those places. But yeah, you were sort of on this thing, and the record company guys would come and hear you because they would drink in these pubs, and then they'd sort of sign you or they wouldn't, and with the intellectuals, they didn't sign us, So we thought, maybe it's me and Nick sort of singing and stuff. We were crap singers. In fact, we were pretty awful all the way around, really. So we thought, get Glenn in. He's a bit like Brian Ferry, a bit kind of like suave and attractive, and get Lee in on bass. I guess Nick was still playing guitar at this point. So Lee Gorman played bass. And we had a keyboard player, so me and Nick on guitars, I guess. So it was quite a big band. It felt like 57 Men. It was called that because it felt like there were 57 men, And Darren Costin was on drums, of course, by that time. So the same thing. Did some demos, interested in the demos, came to see us, not interested in the band.
Wow.
So the next time around, we sort of thought, okay, let's slim it right down. And I guess it was possibly breakup time at that point for me and Nick and Darren. But I said, look, let's, I'll sing, I'll play guitar. Nick, you need to play bass. And Darren, you play drums. So we're like a little three-piece, And I guess the Police were a sort of a model at that time because they were massively successful. But I could see how touring will become practical and stuff within that format, And and we did the demos and we didn't do any gigs and got signed. So they didn't actually see what they were letting us.
So on record, you were fantastic.
Exactly, yeah. So we signed to this little label called Rewind Records.
Wow.
And, so they put out the first 2 singles that we ever did. And John Peel played one of them and was fairly disparaging about it, I think. But nevertheless, he played it and... and we built up, we did more of the sort of London gigs and started building up a sort of following. By that time, a guy called Dave Bernand joined the band, and that's where it became Huang Chung, Huang. Yeah.
So was you signed to Astra at this point?
Arista. Yeah.
Arista.
So the Arista deal came out of us, from that process of having the little indie deal. Yeah. And we had a manager, and he kind of talked Arista into doing I think it was a 2-album, or maybe it was a 3-album deal that we did with them, but always an option for them to get out of it if they wanted to.
Get out clause, yeah. Yes. At that time, was you writing songs for Points on a Curve at this bit? Was it sort of aiming towards that, was it?
Well, the Huang Chung album was our sort of live set, and when you talk about, the songwriting on that album, I mean, we want to reissue that this year because it's the 40th anniversary of this year.
Fantastic.
So, in fact, I downloaded all the files for the multi-tracks last night, actually, and
wow,
it's really interesting to hear it, and it's a good record. For me, it's got a song like Tina Na. It's got a lot of my attempting to write a song that uses modern harmony, but within a sort of rock context. So it's quite a strange sounding song. You could listen to it in some ways as a sort of prototype of Dancehall Days, which it sort of is. But if you ever want me to talk you through the chords, I can, and you'll be like, "Wow, they're pretty dissonant chords."
And was it true David Geffen changed the name? Is that right?
Yeah. Wow. So when we signed, so we did the Arista album. At the end of that process, I wrote Dancehall Days, and Dancehall Days was clearly a sort of hit song. There was a very different sense from people. When then they heard that track, it's kind of suddenly our publishers wanted to invite us out for lunch and stuff, and it's all like, we never met them before, really. And then we did a version of Dancehall Days with Tim Freeze-Green. Tim Freeze-Green was at that time working with Talk Talk. And was like considered to be state-of-the-art, but also experimental, the sort of Nigel Godrich of his time, I suppose, But the experience of working with him was tough, actually, because... It was kind of like he wanted to make the record, basically, and then have me sing on it. Yeah. And I didn't like what he did with it. I don't think any of us did,
So was it just going to be you just doing vocals and he was going to do all the music and stuff?
Essentially. Yeah. In the 80s, that was kind of going that way because you had drum machines and synths, and it started to, that model of needing the band in the studio to play stuff was no longer even desirable, really. It was like... So he was trying to get a much more quirky kind of pop thing out of it. And that version of Dancehall Days is going to be on these
amazing.
reissues, you know. And listening to it now, I sort of think, nah, this isn't good, you know. So anyway, we had this point where we recorded Dancehall Days for Arista, and but we got a new manager, and this new manager sort of said, you've got to get out of this Arista deal and sign to an American label, because this degree of musicality that you've got, and I don't see that in a sort of self-aggrandizing way. It's just like the music quality that we were aiming at was different from, you know, the bands that got signed in this country. You know?
Yeah.
So David essentially got us out of the Arista deal, you know, which felt dangerous at the time in a way, because they were kind of like, okay, let's do a second album, you know, and we're willing to go with that. And David was like, no, we want out of the deal, and we want that recording of, well, you can keep that recording of Dancehall Days, but you know, we don't want you to apply the re-recording clause to
Right.
it. So they agree to all of these things, which in retrospect, I'm sure they regret, or sort of maybe thought, oh, wow, how did we do that? How did David talk us into this? You know? But David was a very good manager, because he could talk people into that stuff. So we were in the wilderness for a few weeks, but David had the confidence of a good manager to go to the States, and he got us deal offers from Elektra, I think, and from Geffen. And in the end, we decided to go with Geffen.
I mean, Geffen, what a label.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
In those days, it was a very little label. You know, they had offices on Sunset Boulevard that were great, you know, one-story building, and just maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 people working in that office, and we sort of knew them all, and they were all very experienced guys, and you felt like you were in sort of safe hands with them.
I mean, when you look at his back catalogue, like Joni and the Eagles.
Well, absolutely.
And Jackson Brown.
Yeah. Now,
Like,
he's a central sort of guru figure in the music business from the early 70s on, really, as a manager first, and then as a label owner, and then obviously into DreamWorks.
I think his style is sort of unorthodox as well, isn't it, as a manager? And I think that suits bands like yourself at the time. They were kind of...
Well, he sort of got into... He was into artists, I think, you know.
That's right.
So he wasn't into formularizing things, although... No, I'd say Geffen was a sort of maverick label, really, because, you know, they sang Guns N' Roses and Nirvana when grunge was, you know, just a...
And nobody wanted to touch
glint in its father's eyes. I think absolutely nobody wanted those bands, you know. But he saw it, or rather he gave license to his A&R guys to sign that stuff. And then they would get behind it. That's the thing with American labels, I found. Once they made the decision to go with it, they really went with it and put money on the table. And whereas over here, you get signed to a label, but they don't put money into it. And
is it kind of good luck, boys? You know,
it is,
you sign it and good luck, boys.
So we put this out, you know, and if it goes to number one, then we'll think about giving you a bit of money.
Here, boy, have a cigar. You're going to go far.
All of that stuff.
Pink Floyd called it early, I think, on that one.
They got it right. Yeah.
So you were recording the album with Ross Cullum and Chris Hughes.
Yes, that's
who done Tears for Fears and Adamant to a degree. Yeah. I mean, amazing producers. They're one of the guys that made those 80s sounds. What was it like recording the album?
Great will be the headline, and underneath it was a but, you know, very long-winded, you know, and that was partly to do with the technology, but also I think partly to do with the mindset. So the technology was very early drum machines, synthesizers, you know, the Fairlight CMI, which the theory of it was, this instrument where you could put a sound into it and then play it, you know, tune it to sort of equal temperament and play it in any key. And, you know, the reality was that it was like very low sampling rate quality and horrendous to get it to run in sync with the tape machine.
There's no MIDI back then, was there?
No, there was, basically the technology was the same that they used in movies to sync up pictures with soundtrack.
Right.
So it was tested, but it was not designed to be shuttling back and forth, you know, making a pop record sort of thing. It was designed for a sort of one-off run through, do you know what I mean, and just line things up, you know.
And what sort of producers were they? Were they very hands-on? Did they just let you experiment and then put their part in when they felt necessary, or did they sort of...
Chris was pretty hands-on, you know, he was definitely in control with the Fairlight and very painstaking and meticulous. And I think there was, in those days, you know, having been in a world of where, you know, you've got your band in the studio, drums are all mic'd up, a bit of screen round them, you know, bass. Well, like Let It Be, the Beatles in Let It Be, you know, they're all in the room together playing. So Huang Chung, a lot of that was recorded in that way. And so you're reliant on the musician to keep in time, keep in tune, you know, and to perform, basically, you know. And I think once these machines came in, especially doing the drum parts, there was this sense, okay, well, that it's going to be in time because it's a machine.
Yeah.
And also it's not going to do fills all the time because it's a machine, So it was like heaven on earth, really, in some ways. But on the other hand, you've got this very sort of, there's no life coming from it, You have to sort of create that, really, that sort of Frankenstein. You have to put a few 40,000 volts through it, sort of thing, to try and get it to have some energy,
Was it easy to lock into the drum machines?
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it. And there were all sorts of records that were made with drum machines at the time that we loved.
Yeah.
So Dare, the Human League album, springs to mind as the first kind of truly. I mean, I know there's German bands, Kraftwerk and so on, doing stuff, but for me, Dare was the first like English good songs. That whole kind of feel for things that English bands had, that was done entirely electronically.
And it was at Abbey Road you were recording?
We were recording Points on the Curve at Abbey Road.
And Studio 2.
Studio 2,
Wow.
That big room. And we were there every day for, I say 9 months, maybe it wasn't quite that long, but it wasn't far short of it. And the whole album project took about a year to do.
And did the Abbey Road, because I know you're a Beatles man, we was talking before we were talking earlier. Yeah. Did the magic ever wear off for you, being in that room, or every day when you stepped through the doors, you're like, wow, was it?
There was, making an album is definitely a journey, and it starts off frothy and great, like all journeys do, and then there's that long plateau slog of actually, getting the hi-hat right, or whatever it might be, these little nuts and bolts that have to be great. And certainly the thinking with the album was that if every single ingredient was, in inverted commas, perfect, then the song would be perfect.
Yeah.
And that it was now possible to make the perfect pop record,
Yeah.
So I think we all had that aspiration. But of course, it's a ridiculous idea, and making great records is all about capturing moments, a certain sort of energy and stuff. It took me a while to figure that out. But in Abbey Road, no, we were meticulous. And I was saying earlier, sort of doing vocals at Abbey Road for me, we did them in Studio 2. It would have probably been better to use Studio 3 and somewhere a little less.
So you'd be on your own in this huge room?
This massive room.
Doing a vocal?
Yeah. So you set up, headphones, baffle in front of you, the mic, and everything's going into the control room, which was on effectively first floor level, and all you had was this window that you couldn't really see into it from that ground floor level.
Yeah.
And, you do a vocal take. So you're hearing the track, hearing your vocal, and at the end of it, there's silence, sort of thing. So you speak into the mic, go, how's that? Nothing until they switch the talkback button on. And then when they do that, you can hear that everyone's laughing and someone's telling a story. And they go, yeah, it's great, do it again. So okay, do it again, and after about the fourth time, your voice is starting to go, and they're like, yeah, starting to get there now. It's like, is anybody actually listening to these takes?
They're probably having lunch.
Because again, these days, you can do take after take after take and keep them all, and then review it. But then you would do a take on a vocal track, and then you'd erase that track with the next take.
Wow.
So, and I would have this sense of like, well, I nailed that line, And it's like, no, we just do the whole thing again. It's like, don't you want to keep that? And it's like, no. So it did get frustrating, lonely, and, it was despairing at some points.
But still amazing.
But absolutely, you get over all that, and, but I guess, I learned a lot about the disciplines of working in music, working as a musician, as an artist, and that it's I used to say this to my son Harry, music isn't fun. It's like about really nailing things and kind of achieving an objective.
It's a shame that musicians today won't really get a studio experience anymore because it's all in the box with computers, isn't it? It's a shame no one has that sort of. I know standing on your own in the Studio 2 singing was miserable. At the time, oh no, but I mean, you wouldn't have changed that for the world, would you?
No, absolutely. And I was very aware towards the sort of mid-80s, we were working in studios like Ocean Way in the States, and in LA, and Hit Factory in New York and stuff. And
that's amazing.
And to work in those studios was a thrill, and I loved it. During the 80s, the tour, we didn't do that much touring, but the live thing I found pretty stressful, But working in the studios, I adored it. The atmosphere and the concentration on detail.
The different studios as well. Was there a different sort of working ethic and atmosphere in that? Was the Americans more softer than the British? Was it? I've heard that before.
Yeah, softer. They were more professional.
Oh, okay.
I say that Abbey Road was super professional in this sort of BBC kind of way, in that everything worked and they found innovative solutions,
Yeah.
But I can remember doing work in the Hit Factory in New York City. And this was when I did my solo album after Wang Chung. And we were in there during the day. And when we left at sort of like 9 in the evening, they broke the studio down and another band came in and recorded from like 10 till 6 or something the following morning. And when we came back in at sort of 10 the next morning, the whole studio, almost down to the book and the page it was open at sort of thing, was back where it was before. Do you know what I mean? So that remarkable the way the engineers and the tape ops were disciplined and worked.
Are they quite experimental in the States as well? Like in Abbey Road?
Less experimental.
Less experimental,
yeah. So it's much more professionalised, much more kind of...
uniformed to a degree.
Yeah, you get a good... It sort of reflects in the music in a way,
Yeah.
Over here, it's geared up sort of to get that sort of experimental, surprising... We never thought that would work, but it does, by combining this and that.
Let's plug that in.
And somebody was, playing a saw backwards or something, It's, whereas in the States, it's more kind of, no, this is how you do that. We need excellent microphone, gold-plated connectors into the desk and, and this tape machine and Dolby S or what we were using at the time. And, just incredible sound, But it's down to you as the musician to come up with the ideas, You're not getting prodded and sort of punched by the engineers.
Moved along, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So you had Dance All Days come off the album.
Yes.
What was the inspiration behind the song originally? Do you remember where that came from, or was it...
It wasn't inspired by a particular event and stuff, but it was a sort of a mix of, Dance All Days was kind of rhymed with Dolores Hayes. And Dolores Hayes was a character in Nabokov's book Lolita, which I was reading at the time. And I think the whole dancehall thing, when I was young, when I was like first learning guitar, sort of 12, 13, 14, I used to play in his band, in a highly underage sort of way, So the dancehall was maybe the Pavilion in Gillingham where he used to play and I used to be in his band, So there was some sort of nostalgic thing going on. And I think that's the emotion that people get from that song. And certainly at the time they did. The first video we did was with Derek Jarman.
Wow.
And Derek was, he would make pop videos, the stuff he liked, to finance his movies, and I felt very honoured, to be helping him to finance Caravaggio or whatever he was working on at the time. He picked up on that nostalgic thing. So his video uses some Super 8 colour video film that his father took at the New York World Fair and stuff, and video footage of him as a baby in Scotland. And so, I think that, when you and everyone we knew could believe sharing what was true, the sort of idealization of the past is something in Dancehall Days. So it was definitely sort of that nostalgic thing was going on. Musically, I always think that it was influenced by Little Feat and their sort of shuffly kind of feel, and so that's that sort of 4 on the, strong backbeat. Yeah. But the rhythm is, it's got that sort of thing.
It's kind of loose and tight at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. And I sort of wanted that. But working with drum machines, trying to get a drum machine to do that in the early 80s was nigh on impossible. That was a very time-consuming process. But we sort of came up with it, Yeah.
There's a wonderful... I was on YouTube and there's yourself doing it on Top of the Pops.
Yes.
I think it was December or January. I can't remember what it was. And you were just really enjoying yourself doing the song. Yeah. And it was amazing.
It was a thrill to be on Top of the Pops.
Was it... on a side note now about Top of the Pops, was it a fun experience? Because you see documentaries now and they say it was very much sort of regimented. Like, like you all dance and sing and throw balloons around. Did you get that vibe when you were there?
It was a bit like that. There were these big cameras, sort of on the massive stands that moved around quite quickly.
Yeah.
And there were maybe 30 people in the audience. When you watch Top of the Pops, it seems like it's this 100, 200 people having a party, And there was this kind of, so there's probably, I guess, 2 stages. So one band setting up on one stage while the other's doing their thing. So it's definitely geared up to the requirements of making a TV show, So the audience would be like pushed in front of the stage. Do you mean it's like, okay, go, and they film and everyone would be dancing around. Do you mean? And then it would stop and they go, okay, cut, next, and then push the audience back to the other stage, dance now, It's regimented in that sense. But it was a thing, do you know what I mean? And being at the BBC and being in that atmosphere and just that whole thing of you knew that you were going to be broadcast to the whole nation, as it were, which is, again, is not something that happens anymore, really.
It was lovely to see, like, there was you and Nick, and you were just looking at each other like, we've done it. You can see your eyes are huge.
Yeah. I'm sure you were petrified. but I think, the great thing about being in a band is that you get to share these experiences, and so they become real to you guys, sort of thing, because it's very hard to communicate what it's like to people who've never done it,
Yeah, I mean, it's just an institution I miss it. I used to watch the Pops like religiously, whether I hated what was on or not.
Yeah, which one did? Because a lot of it was just shite, wasn't it?
But you had to see.
But there was occasionally, or I suppose more than occasionally, there was stuff on that was great, and sort of Bowie when he was on, and
Nirvana.
Absolutely. I don't think I was watching it by then, but it was, But I remember the Bowie appearances were thrilling, And certain artists, you just really get into what they were doing,
I mean, you've had an amazing sort of, like, if you're a rock person, music person, journey from Abbey Road to Bowie places. It's been an amazing journey for you, isn't it?
It has. It really has. And I think the whole thing of working in the States a lot as well was a massive bonus.
Were you touring with the Cars for a while? Mm-hmm. And what were they like to work with? Were they
great?
a great band, absolutely amazing band.
I mean, they wwere playing. So Dance for Days was that sort of hit, sort of top 40 hit, I suppose, and we had Don't Let Go as well. Anyway, Points on the Curve was a successful album, and Geffen were pushing it, and they got us this tour with the Cars, who were hugely successful at that point. Heartbeat City was the album, I think, wasn't it? And Drive was used on Live Aid.
What a song.
Yeah. And so they were playing 60 to 80,000 seaters every night. Well, not every night, but that was, roll into town, you'd do that gig, you'd have maybe the day off next. But there were probably, sort of 4 days playing, a couple of days off, and a lot of gigs, And because Wang Chung was, MTV and stuff, it was like a household name. Those places were pretty packed when we played our opening set, because sometimes when the support band comes on, everyone's in the bar, aren't they?
That's right,
But no, these were pretty packed. And we were like young English boys, sort of, me, Nick and Darren, and a guy called Graham Pleath, who was our keyboard player at the time. And we really gave it everything we had, do you know what I mean? Yeah. And the crowd loved it, And then when the Cars came on, they had this policy of not speaking to the audience.
Right.
Okay, which was a sort of arty kind of, Cars were, Rick Ocasek especially, was very into the sort of art aspects of pop music, post Andy Warhol sense of, what is pop music and how do you
deconstruct it. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Live.
So the whole thing that they play a great song, people would go crazy in the audience, and they just turn their backs on the audience for like a few minutes, and then they turn back again and play the next song. And I got the sort of minimalism of that, and what are you supposed to say? Hello, Cleveland, and all that stuff. How are you doing tonight? And all
Thanks
that
for
rubbish.
coming.
Yeah, so Rick was not into doing all that. I totally understand it, but it progressively pissed off the audience through the night, such that by the end of it, they thought Wang Chung were brilliant, but the Cars didn't really enjoy it. Even though the Cars were delivering a state-of-the-art show with lights, and they had 2 synclaviers running in sync and stuff, and it was like a real state-of-the-art show, brilliant show they did,
It's amazing, like, he was deconstructing it live almost and trying to alienate his audience.
Successfully,
I saw Jeff Lynne a few years ago at the O2, and you were kind of waiting for Jeff to speak.
Okay.
And he did about 5 numbers, all amazing, and he just went, thanks very much. Everyone went mental. That's all he had to say. It wasn't like, he's rude. You just go on, say something, Jeff. Everyone's like, come on, just say hello to us.
You have to take that all into account, I think. But Rick was being very kind of, this is how I'm going to do it,
Yeah.
And all power to him, he didn't deviate from that for the whole tour, I don't think so.
So did the tour help the band, or you were already sort of doing well by that point?
Yeah, I mean, we were very fortunate to have MTV, I think. Yeah. Was it fortunate? Yes, it was. Yeah. Because it was the first time, in the States before that, each city would have its own top radio stations. They'd all have a particular sound. And you getting on those radio stations was tough, And if you were sort of like Wang Chung in a sense, because of being signed to Geffen, was a sort of LA band.
Yeah.
Or perceived to be that way in the States. So New York was always quite hostile to us, Not in a not like it would be here, but, it was, we would certainly weren't big on the East Coast in the same way we were on the West,
Yeah.
And but MTV was the first time that the same product, if you like to use that awful word, was broadcast across the whole nation. So everybody got the same thing. A sort of homogenization that is the beginning at the end of, the music business as it was, do you know what I mean? Which was much more local and much more focused on sort of individual quirks and stuff.
Could you notice like the rock cities, for instance, they sort of say you have certain rock cities that... Detroit being one, but they sort of, it's all this mythology as a person that hasn't lived it, you understand
that was how it was then, Detroit. And, we were very big, I would say, in Chicago, Milwaukee.
Wow.
Those cities really embraced Wang Chung, and we were very successful in Canada as well. There was something about that Northern American thing, The South, we didn't really play as Wang Chung. I remember we did a gig in Birmingham, Alabama. I don't remember the gig much, but I remember being there and being pretty shocked at how it was down there. Do you know, even that's sort of in the early 80s,
You did some work with, is it William Friedkin? Did I get his name right? How did that come about? Did he just contact you because he was a big fan?
Yes, he was a big fan of Points on the Curve.
Right.
And he was making a movie called To Live and Die in LA. And I think working with a Hollywood-type composer and getting despondent about the results, and was using Weight off of Points on the Curve as a temp track, as they called it, So they would shoot during the day, and then he'd watch the rushes with that just playing on a loop in the background, I think, and decided that's what he wanted the music to be. So he literally contacted us out of the blue. I've often told the story of being I'd visiting this friend of mine who I hadn't really seen for years because I was a friend of his at university, and the phone rang in his flat in Bloomsbury because there were no mobiles in those days, and he picked it up and he went, "Oh, it's for you." And it was like, how does he know I'm here? And it was a woman saying, Mr. William Friedkin would like to speak to you in half an hour. Will you be at this number? And I was like, okay. And I wasn't really sure who Mr. William Friedkin was. Do you know what I mean? I expected, but Billy was an amazing person, and we had this hour-long conversation where he was talking about the film and talking about music in movies and completely.
Did he have to say, "I'm William Friedkin from The Exorcist"?
He probably did.
Did he have to drop that?
Yeah, I don't think he did say that, but I think I found out later, sort of thing, But he may well have done. Yeah, he's not. Billy has this. I call him Billy because he's a friend. That's what I call him. He has this reputation, being really difficult and fiery and even scary, But he was never less than charming and lovely to me and Nick. Just a great guy.
I wonder sometimes if that reputation helps him get his work done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that business, God, you've got to be tough, man. It's not like making pop records.
I mean, it's a fairly ruthless industry, the film industry. The music industry can be terrible, but I think the film is,
I mean, the music industry is, but somehow it's kind of understandably terrible when it's terrible. If you know what I mean? It's like there's a game to be played. If you want to play it, you've got a chance, assuming you're any good, And if you don't want to play it, then you're not going to get anywhere, But the movie business, two of my children are actors, and I don't envy their experiences of being at the whim of people who haven't got a clue what they're doing, basically.
There's a lot of bluffing and
there is just massive hierarchy of people, Whereas in the music business, there's you and the songs you've written, and then there's a producer who you hopefully choose well, and then a record label will hopefully get behind you and have a go at getting on the radio and stuff. That's how it was in the 80s, anyway. It was relatively simple because the chains of ownership, as it were clearly defined. The record companies owned everything. They put a lot of money into it. They needed to get the money back, and if they made a profit for you, great. And if they didn't, well, they took the hit for the loss, which always seemed to me a fairly reasonable way of operating for an artist, at least.
Yeah. And then after that, Mosaic came out, didn't it? Yeah. And that was with, is it Peter Wolf?
Yeah, Peter Wolf produced.
And he did Starship, and obviously Everybody Have Fun Tonight was the big track off that album. Yeah. What was the difference between the two albums? Did you notice a difference between your writing from Points on the Curve to Mosaic?
Yeah. Doing the movie soundtrack with Friedkin was, played right into my prog rock, arty, farty sort of ideas about making records, And the album we released had To Live and Die in LA on it, the song, obviously, but it had 4 songs on side 1 and then instrumental stuff from the movie on side 2, which to me mirrored Bowie's albums Low and Heroes, and I love that format of songs, instrumental, and so I was in heaven. But of course it didn't really sell To Live and Die in LA, and it didn't have a top 40 hit, not pop top 40, Billboard top 40. So it was kind of like, guys, you got to have a number 1 record, otherwise it's good night. And so that was the game to be played, and Peter Wolf was a guy who had hit records, and the record companies believed in producers very much in those days to basically kick the bands until they produced another We Built This City sort of thing, which effectively Peter did. You know, he took Everybody Have Fun Tonight, which when Nick came up with the initial sort of ideas for it, and I sort of wrote a song, that had that chorus, but sort of fleshed it all out. And I wrote it as a sort of slightly Hey Jude ballad type thing, And Peter sort of said, I love that song, but we got to speed it up and make it Everybody Have Fun Tonight. And I go, no, Peter, you don't get it. It's meant to be ironic. It's meant to be, if only everybody could have fun tonight. And he's like, nah, and he just, programmed it all up in the synclavier. Did a great job, and Peter is like irresistible. He's just forward momentum, enthusiastic, positive, and me bleating away in the corner about this or that. He's kind of like, whatever, and just carries on. Doesn't seem to deflect him at all from the objectives, But Peter's a great musician as well, so he was sensitive to, Eyes of the Girl and the other really great tracks on Mosaic. He facilitated a great deal, and we worked with great singers in LA. This Saida Garrett was on that album, who was writing with Michael Jackson and in his band, and amazing. And we worked with Brian Malouf, the engineer, who was Michael's engineer as well. And so we were really in the sort of top echelons, and working in great studios. It wasn't Ocean Way that we were in, but it was one of those kind of there was a lot smart LA places. Yeah, there
was a lot of pressure on that single and on that album.
There was. It was definitely make or break in a way, and. It made, it did what it was supposed to do, and then we were out on tour with Tina Turner.
Wow!
And that was an amazing tour to do.
That woman's amazing, isn't she?
Phenomenal.
Was it every night? She was just killing it, I imagine.
Yeah. She used to arrive like literally, almost like get out of the limo, walk on the stage, do the show, get off the stage, get back in the limo, go back to the hotel. We never saw her apart from one evening where she watched our set, and afterwards was very lovely, and so that was all great, but she was the thing I remember about her was doing Top of the Pops, actually. One of the times we did it twice, so she was on basically, and it was at this time when Top of the Pops, there was always this tussle between the MU, who wanted the bands to play live, and the record companies who wanted the bands to mime. Because, if the bands couldn't play, which quite often they couldn't, you just want to hear the record, So, but they compromised by having the vocals live and the backing track recorded, So I remember doing my vocal, little voice and everything, and then she was next up and did her I Can't Stand the Rain or whatever it was that she did. It was just mind-blowing hearing her singing in that room, which was almost like she didn't really need the mic. She just filled the room, filled the space with her presence, and filled the sound of her voice was just mind-blowing.
I saw Edwin Starr once.
Okay.
And they said to me, he doesn't use monitors because he blows them up. And I was like, no way. Anyway, I stood at the front and he nearly blew my glasses out. Really? I know exactly what you mean, that power. You're like, how does this come out of a person?
Exactly. She's little, it's like... But no, I used to watch her shows when we were on that tour, and great, and her band was great.
I can imagine, yeah.
And a lot of English guys in that band, I think, at the time.
Oh, really?
And, and at first they were a bit, when you're doing a support slot, there's always that, how much of the stage have you got, do you know what I mean? And to begin with, we were like in a sort of like 6-inch strip at the front, do you know what I mean? But they listened to us a couple of times and kind of like, these guys are pretty good, so they gave us a bit more room, and we ended up, being mates and being helpful.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And your video for Everybody Have Fun Tonight was Godly and Cream, wasn't it?
It was.
And I mean, they're quite arty for their time, wasn't they?
They're super.
So
super
they're sort of, to me, they're the jazz artists of the video world.
Yeah.
And
very creative.
Yeah. What was their experience like working with them? Were they fun? Were they? I bet they were great party boys. That's what I heard.
We didn't do any partying. I'm very boring when it comes to all that sort of stuff. But no, they were very focused, and the video shoot was simple for me in the sense that it was like, come dressed in black, don't smile, sing the song, and keep as still as you possibly can. And they filmed me like maybe 8 times doing the song. And then some poor person had to cut it all together, so that you get that weird flickery thing. But our model, of course, was Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer.
Yeah, when I was watching the video the other day, I thought, it must be a huge sort of influence on it.
Yeah, no, it definitely was, And I think we met Jan Svenkmeyer, who made Sledgehammer and did all those stop motion videos. And he was going to do something, but didn't work out in the end. I think that was towards the end of like when we were doing Warmer Side of Cool and that very last album that we did for Geffen.
Yeah. So when did you sort of first go solo? When was that?
Well, Nick and I the process of making the last album, Warm Side of Cool, was, we'd done Everybody Have Fun Tonight, and we sort of got this entirely new audience, of party people sort of thing, So then it was kind of like, okay, so make another party record,
Yeah.
And I think I was really pulling back towards, now I want to make another To Live and Die in LA record,
Yeah.
So Nick, he's much more sensible than I am sort of thing, so he was trying to write sort of rock kind of stuff, that would position us in a certain way. And I was writing whatever I thought of next, which is what I tend to do, and which is not consistent at all, So we made this Warm Side of Cool. I find it a very kind of bumpy listen, there's some great ideas on it, sort of, but it doesn't really hang together particularly well. Yeah. And Nick and I were sort of, it's a bit like it's pretentious, isn't it? It's a bit like the end of the Beatles, really. We're not in that league, but it was similar. We wouldn't actually have a massive row about things, but there was a lot of like, I don't really like this sort of silent kind of like, grudgingly letting Nick do his whatever, thing, and he would grudgingly listen to me, write a long outro for some song and have Vinnie Caliuta playing on drums and be kind of, it's okay.
I mean, you seem to have a wonderful friendship with each other.
We do.
Yeah, I mean, it's 40, 50 years old now.
Yeah. And I think we went through a phase, where, that album was a difficult time and we needed some space away from each other. And I think bands, it's a very interesting, as a psychologist needs to get into writing about what is it that makes bands tick and not tick. It's people say, it's like a marriage, but it's sort of worse. Really.
When you were writing with Nick around, were you writing with Nick in mind, as opposed to your solo work where you can be more introspective kind of thing? I
think in the sort of points on the curve time especially, and Everybody Have Fun Tonight, I was definitely thinking about Wang Chung and what is it, and tailoring what I wrote to a certain extent. But I think with To Live and Die in LA and Warm Side of Cool, I wasn't. I was just thinking we need to do something amazing, and that will come out of just being true to the next thing I write. Do you know what I mean? Rather than trying to sort of design it in a sense, But for whatever reasons, I wasn't writing particularly great at that time, or certainly not writing stuff that was catching people's imagination. And also I think the zeitgeist was changing in the sense that, the Warm Side of Cool came out really on the cusp of Nirvana and Guns N' Roses being signed to Geffen. And in a way, it sort of felt like overnight almost the 80s finished when Nevermind came out.
One song.
Yeah. And that was it, so the choices open to us then. Because Geffen sort of said, make another album,
Wow, he did. He was kind of cool about it.
Yeah. But Nick and I sometimes wonder what it would have been like if we could have sort of manned up and actually sort of, okay, let's focus. But we would have had to have faced either in the sort of grunge direction or in the sort of hip-hop direction, which I think is maybe the way we'd have gone more sort of electronic and stuff. Yeah. But for whatever reason, we didn't do that.
Because I was listening to Tasered Up, and that's quite a rock album.
It is, yeah. And I think that's, Nick and I, that's what we grew up with in a sense, and that's what comes through, comes through on Taser Up and on my solo albums there. I think in terms of a rock band, with a rock drummer and a bass player and a couple of guitar players and a keyboard player, and sort of that still is what I like to listen to most. I think that's the most durable.
Yeah, and what's lovely as well, I was listening to your what, I don't know how you pronounce the name, orchestography?
Oh yeah, orchestography.
I got it right. Well,
you did very good. Yeah,
I've been practicing that for days.
That's great, Robbie.
Because that's classical and the Wang Chung together. So you're kind of blending those early influences that you liked and that together. And it's, if people haven't heard this album, they need to get it. It's on Spotify. Yeah. I've played it endlessly.
Oh, cool.
So it's just basically your songs with an orchestra, isn't it?
It is.
But it works so well.
It does. Some of them work great, I think. Space Junk, and there's a song called Overwhelming Feeling, which is a song on Taser Up, which is not a big Wang Chung hit. But the people who did the orchestral album with us were very good, actually, at giving us a bit of license to choose what we wanted to do, as long as we did the hits, obviously, Yeah. And I feel Overwhelming Feeling on orchestography is far better than it is on Taser Up.
Did they approach you or did you approach them?
They approached us, yeah. And initially they just wanted to do, I think, Dancehall Days and Everybody Have Fun, but we talked them into doing a whole album, and they probably regret, but it made it great fun, in a sense, hiring the orchestra for the day, get them to do 10 songs rather than just 2, So,
that's great.
Yeah.
So you're touring at the moment as well, aren't you?
Planning to in August.
Planning to in August, yeah. This is 2022, in case you listen to it 4 years from now. I forget to put that in sometimes.
Yeah.
And so whereabouts are you touring? Are you local? Or?
Yeah, well, we got some gigs in the UK. We're doing these, it's called Let's Rock. And so it's an 80s kind of show. I think it is all oriented around the 80s. And we're doing one in Newport in Gwent, I think.
Right.
And then we're doing one up in Sunderland.
Wow.
Near where, I'm not sure. But it's a long drive.
And if anybody wants to find out about you, where's the best place to go?
That's a good question. The Let's Rock website, I would say, would probably be good, because our Wang Chung website is a mess, and Nick and I never sort of look at it. But I tend to post on my own sites, so that's jackhues.com, and especially my Facebook, which is just Jack Hues, Jack Hues official sort of thing.
So just a couple more questions. If you were starting in this business today, what advice would you give a young musician?
I always remember reading a similar sort of question. I think it was Carly Simon doing the interview, and she just said, learn your instrument. And I thought, easy enough. But in a way, that's very good advice, And I know you could advise, get a great suit, work out how to use social media and stuff. I don't know whether you can ever really work out how to do that. I think ultimately, I've met and worked with lots of bands over the years, and lots of them are brilliant, like really good. But what you've got to have is a song that connects with a mass of people, and that doesn't mean it's got to be some sort of football chanty crap thing. Do you know what I mean? It's just got to touch people in some way, And when you've got that, then everything else sort of falls into place, And you can't get that by thinking, okay, I'm going to sit down and write it. It's just going to come to you one day, so make sure you're ready for it, And for that, iPhone, Android phone, whatever, make sure your voice recorder works, and get used to singing into it, get used to jotting down musical ideas. I think, there are two halves of the business in a sense. There's the writer side and there's the performer side. The performer side is great, and some people are very drawn to that, but for me, it's a treadmill because you just got to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. So the writing side is where the money is. I think everybody understands that.
Yeah.
So I would advise, if you've got a feeling at all for writing songs and stuff, then get doing that, and don't think that you're just going to be able to do it because you want to. It's got to come out of something deep inside you, and that's going to require quite a lot of application. And like I say, just have the means with you to record any ideas that you get whenever you get them.
That's amazing. Jack, what can I say? Thank you so much for talking to me today.
It's a great pleasure.
I've had a wonderful time chatting to you.
Good, it's been great.
And so Jack's on tour. Go and check it out on the dates. Check it, because obviously this could be 4 years from now. Check out the Wang Chung albums. They're all on Spotify, and there's lots of brilliant stuff. Thanks. And thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave us a review.